Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this session to discuss and to conclude the works of this conference that try to shed light on a very important development in the region, which is the rise of ISIL and the reactions and that were witnessed afterwards, whether in the region or the main powers of the world. We have tried to shed light upon different aspects of this phenomena and these phenomena and the repercussions on the region. So we have started by reiterating a main point, which is ISIL wouldn't have risen again had the Pacific revolution, peaceful revolution, been allowed, of course, freedom, dignity, and social equality. This session is completely consecrated to say what we have missed during this conference. All of you will have 3 minutes, or everyone has 3 minutes to tackle issues that were not tackled previously to avoid repeating the same things. So you can raise your hands and you will be allowed to tackle your point. The biggest problem that we face in the region, how to represent the Ummah, the nation. We all talk about national unity and confessionalism or denominations weren't that important before. And differently to different nations, we are divided. In my opinion, there is no unified society, homogeneous society. I have worked on the sociology of the 20th century. I have read a lot about this topic, and the conclusion that I can gather is the distribution of resources or power. When there's a disparity between ethnic groups within one state, there's ethnic conflict and separation, segregation, and we have conflict of classes, of social classes. The distribution of these resources, or similarly, if we have this disparity between religious denominations, we have a religious war or conflict. So this is the framework that we should talk about. There's a gap between academics and politicians. This is the framework that should form the basis in order to, in such a conference, taking into consideration that every case might be different. And this is what I wanted to talk about to benefit from this conference. Thank you.
Well, I think one point we missed so far is to think about, this ISIL and as well as other non-state actors. So what if they are here to stay? We just, kind of developed a language, discourse of security. Probably we should also be thinking of a language of accommodation. If you look at the recent history, there were, huge resistance movements all around this geography. And that resistance movements led, they wanted to change the regional landscape. So, but they have not been accommodated. So the result has been disaster. So here, whether it is ISIL, it is Ansar al-Sharia in Libya, and some others. So, the language of security in the case of Al-Qaeda did not prove true. Maybe just next to language of security, there is a security dimension of it, but also a language of accommodation, which may moderate it, which may integrate into society, and it requires a critical threshold between stability and security. Maybe a little bit sacrifice from security for a while, and then provide stability, and then put focus more on security then. So one basic condition is going back to this discourse of democratization, popular demands. It is one condition, and other is thinking of, in addition to democracy, thinking of the sources and the conditions of stability over there. What I'm trying to suggest is to think in terms of a language of accommodation, language of more inclusive security, in addition to those hard security measures we discussed so far.
Thank you very much. دكتور حيدر. بس إذا في مجال أطلب التعريف عن الشخص.
Please introduce yourself before Haider Saeed from Iraq, researcher. During these 2 days, we have discussed several issues related to the political systems in the region. In my opinion, I would like to conclude with something that we haven't tackled. Specifically, what happened is the Levant state from Iraq to Egypt. This region that has provided a lot to the culture of the Arabs is collapsing, and this region might be the only region that witnesses a very complex and sophisticated nationality or diversity. So in the Gulf, for example, you don't have this diversity. So you have several confessions, denominations, and ethnic groups. So these nationalities, these identities are true. However, the political systems that were put forward throughout decades and decades have reached the level of collapse, of the state of collapse. The Ummah, the nation, did not succeed, and the political systems did not succeed. So we need to rethink the structure of the state. The second point that we didn't tackle, or maybe slightly mentioned, I think that the fall of Mosul is the best repercussion or the best image on the failure in this region. This region, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, for example, is from my generation. I have studied under the Ba'ath regime in Iraq, social systems. This generation did not believe and the right to be different, relative concepts. So there's a failure at all levels regarding the principles upon which these governments built their political systems. So we have several factors that have led to the rise of ISIL, the political systems, and other conflicts. I think this is one of the main factors, the failure of modernization in the region. Dr. Saeed. Thank you, Dr. Abdul Musa. Abdul Musa, researcher in the in the Arab Center. I would like to tackle 2 points regarding the challenges facing to face the rise of ISIL. The second point might be a little bit philosophical. ISIL, the fact that ISIL responds to all the questions. First and foremost, I think we have a problem when it comes to assess the analysis, the danger or the threat of ISIL. So the regional parties have different appreciation to this threat, considering ISIL result of violence, the violence of a society. Some others consider that it is a very dangerous organization that might lead to the collapse of the states. So some people consider it a minor problem, some others consider it a major problem. You cannot face a problem or a danger or threat if you don't have common ground when it comes to identifying or defining this threat. This leads us to having a more increased responsibility in terms of identifying this danger. The West has agreed more regarding the danger of ISIL. They have considered that the jihadist Islamist movement is dangerous. However, there are different considerations when it comes to the intervention. We have heard during the last session that in the United States of America, some parties consider that Obama is reluctant, and some people think that Obama is hasty. So the strategic planning is postponed and isn't being tackled, and the people are suffering in Syria and in Iraq, and this gives additional responsibility. The second point is that ISIL, some people consider that ISIL might respond or might answer all the questions. This reminds me the period of the Saddam's invasion of Kuwait, the collapse of the regional system. ISIL reveals a problem that is very true to the this system. Arab strategists have didn't mention the danger of ISIL like a year ago. ISIL very suddenly has been put forward, so we have revolutions and counter-revolutions. ISIL doesn't give the answer. The regional war doesn't. ISIL doesn't give an answer to that. The denominations, the religious conflicts, and the border conflicts, and the power conflicts. ISIL cannot answer to all these questions. James?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say one quick point, because I think the quality of the discussions and debate had at this conference needs to be fed into Western foreign policy making machines. I think that is I'm struck.
How can we do that, James?
Well, I'm struck by the ahistorical nature of the debate in places like London and Washington, which is very much responding to pressures of media coverage, high-profile incidents, etc. And I think the complexity of these issues, the fact, as I said earlier, the layers of history that all of you have spoken about, I think that needs to be a discussion that's not just held in this room, in Qatar, but in this region, but has to be effectively channeled into the West. And how it can be done, I think, is probably in the partnerships between think tanks, universities, into the policy world a bit more strategically as well. I think there are ways to do it. I mean, it's a very open policy dynamic. It needs this level of informedness, and that's what I would urge people to do.
Thank you, James. Andreas?
Thank you very much. Yeah, it was indeed a very productive series of conversation that we had here today and yesterday. I mean, the main point to take away from it, I mean, to the Daesh threat, there is a socio-political dimension to it, and there is a military dimension to it. I think the socio-political dimension, and this is particularly when we talk about threat, and we did talk about threat here today and yesterday. Threat has always various components, and it's very easy to just paint it as black and white, saying, you know, the threat that we're facing here in the region is Iran, and then maybe Israel. But that is quite a very, you know, I had the conversation just outside. That might be a very simplistic way of looking at it. And I think, first of all, the root cause of all this instability, whether it's the Arab Spring or also the rise of Daesh, is generally been the inability to provide security inclusively. So I think Iran is not trying to undermine directly, or doesn't have to do much to actually undermine the stability of these regimes, because these regimes are unstable to begin with and have been unstable to begin with. And I think as soon as, if Arab countries or Arab states, if there was a new form of socio-political organization that can provide inclusive security, I think you would take away this factor of insecurity that Iran has been using in recent decades or particularly in recent years actually, which they have used or abused to establish influence. If in Bahrain the problems between Sunnis and Shias weren't as they are, being Shias being marginalized, I think Iran didn't have an easy entry to go in and support them. The same is true for Saudi Arabia. The same is true for Yemen. If the Zaydis wouldn't have been that marginalized, it wouldn't have been that easy for Iran to go in there. And the same is true in Lebanon. If the Shias would have been part of the original idea of how Lebanon would look like and were part of this system, then Hezbollah wouldn't have had to be created, and there wouldn't be a popular support for it. I mean, we've always tried to portray Iran as an external agent I mean, very much these problems are not coming from the outside. These problems come from the inside of these societies. So if we tackle these problems from the inside, we might be more resilient towards threat that come from the outside, which then would be would be Iran. To talk about the military solution, I mean, as I said before, there is no military solution to Daesh. There is only a military solution to containment. We can solve certain issues militarily when it comes to the spread of Daesh, but we can't really go in and solve the problem and basically defeat them militarily. There is no military solution, and there is no military. And I think the key component, the key factor is capability needs to be developed within the GCC in order to make them an alternative to the West. And I think I agree that there is a willingness in the GCC to do something, but the capability is not there yet. And when I talk about capability, I'm not just talking about buying hardware, because they're very good at this. Transforming, it's about how do you transform financial power, which many of the GCC countries have. How do you transform financial power into political influence or military power? This is not done just by buying a lot of hardware and equipment. I mean, the defense contracts that have been signed by the Ministry of Defense here, which are in excess of $23.5 billion this year, are not enough in order to make Qatar a capable military player. What they need is to have a mindset, the way to actually use this hardware in the right way. And I think this is something that will need at least another 10 years. Both the UAE and Qatar have invested into a long-term security sector reform effort, which is not just capability in terms of hardware capability, but it's about the mental capability of using this hardware. And I think this is the way forward. In probably 10 years' time, inshallah, we'll have a capable military force that can actually support the very expensive and extensive proactive foreign policy that most of the GCC countries have. But this is not there yet. The willingness is there, the capability is not there yet. We're in production of creating it, and then at some point we'll hopefully have it in order to create security for the region from within the region, rather than always having to rely on foreigners to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Andreas. Dr. Muhammad.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to you all. I think this conference was a very opportune moment for all of us to deconstruct the conditions which led to the current situation and to try and understand what's happening in this region. There was common ground between a large number of the experts in their main conclusions. The first conclusion is we are really faced with a crisis and challenge which goes beyond the borders and challenges the post-colonial independent sovereign states. So it goes beyond talking about ISIL and its expansion. We are also talking about crises in Egypt, Yemen, Libya, and other potential threats. I think when it comes to talking about the current situation, there must be a key sentence which says that we are going through a transition in the Arab world, which is open to all sorts of scenarios, which requires really much deeper thinking than sometimes what is being simplified in the media or at the political level. In the different sessions I attended, there was a kind of description and study and analysis, and I hope really even in this session or in future events, an attempt to try and explore what the day after will bring and to post-international alliance or coalition, and what can this alliance or coalition produce of changes internally and externally. Dr. Abdul Hakim yesterday said that it's not ISIL which is not the only regional player. The Kurdish region in northern Iraq, the military and political level. Maybe tomorrow the Kurdish regions of Iraq and Syria will end up unified politically. And therefore, I am trying to provide a sort of a vision for the possible changes and the scenarios which will be seeing both in the near and distant future and short term and long term. By that I mean the rise of the Iranian influence and the sectarian crisis. The question facing the Arab elites is this kind of sectarian strife a matter of destiny and fate for the Arabs, or can we, through our dialogue with our counterparts in the Shiite section, can come up with an alternative to ISIL? There are different indicators. People are not worried about the rise of ISIL only, but ISIL as a model. Maybe this can be repeated or will be repeated, whether at the level of the religious ideological discourse or as a model of resorting to military force to sort out differences. Now in Egypt, and after what happened to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and all the killing and oppression, some of their youth are beginning to contemplate the issue of resorting to arms, whether as a mere act of revenge or to change the situation by force. So we have to explore these avenues. What are the choices? What is possible and not possible in view of these facts? Thank you, Chair. I have 2 points I'd like to talk about. First of all, I felt when I was watching proceedings of this conference about the competition, the regional competition, and the rise of ISIL, and then the renewed American engagement, I couldn't help noticing that there was a lack of mention to the humanitarian aspect on the ground, and this is represented by the large number of refugees. In fact, they number in millions, whether in Syria or in Iraq. The whole thing started with the American invasion, and then, of course, the Palestinian diaspora, and whose situation has been adversely impacted by the recent events. In my opinion, any treatment of these issues and the solutions for them should take into consideration this diaspora, because ultimately, and in my opinion, a large number of them, if not all of them, look to this kind of gathering and to think tanks to see if there is any interest at all in the plight of this large number of refugees. Secondly, I also felt that there is an absence of common language or common discourse vis-a-vis the problems talked about. It's okay and healthy even to have discussions and differences, but to have the absolute minimum of a common language when we're talking about these things is absolutely necessary. In fact, it's incumbent upon think tanks to create this kind of common language between the educated class and other stakeholders, leading to a serious and meaningful dialogue which can lead to some practicable and actionable solutions. Dr. Abdul Wahab Al Qassab. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just felt that there is some sort of vagueness and lack of clarity when Craig talked about the issue of threat. Nobody looked at this issue with this kind of simplicity that there is only one Iranian threat and one Israeli one. I said there's different threats and they are multifaceted, and even sometimes this threat within the same community or society has turned into an armed conflict, and also not forgetting the regional actors and international intervention. Also, the pattern of these conflicts from soft diplomacy, which Iran has exercised for a long time in many areas until they moved into using force through militias in many areas. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Abdul Wahab. Maybe on the other hand, just to distinguish between what constitutes a strategic threat represented by Israel through a huge arsenal of weaponry which can destroy the Middle East 10 times over, maybe, and also the Iranian arsenal. People tend to focus on the nuclear issue. They forget the ballistic missiles, which really form part and parcel of the negotiations, the 5+1 negotiations with Iran. ISIL is a threat, no doubt, but the threat ISIL represents it is a human threat by an ideologized section of people who brainwash to send to commit acts of suicide bombing, etc. So therefore it's a tactical threat. It cannot lead to the destruction of countries and wiping them off the map, unlike the Iranian and the Israeli test. I think you read my paper. In it I alluded to the Israeli attempt to strip the Arab countries of their will, and at the same time I speak of my fears of the Iranian threat and also which is blackmail. Iran engages in nuclear blackmail similarly to what North Korea does. Of course, an equation of one nuclear bomb facing zero nuclear bomb is not like 250 facing one. Thank you. Through what I listened to, the discussions, I think that the ISIL is an entity which has been activated, used, and utilized by many different regional powers until it runs out of the use and usefulness and the functions it's required to do. It will remain a threat until then, but there is also an element of exaggeration to score political points and achieve political purposes. I think the United States has a problem economically. They were surprised by the Arab revolutions. They want to restore the balance. There are three strategic objectives. First of all, they want to create like a Holocaust to get rid of all the Islamist powers in Iraq and Syria and get rid of them all. Secondly, to bleed the Gulf countries of any financial resources. Thirdly, to deprive the liberation movements and the Arab Spring and strip the masses of their ability to regain their and restore their future. Iran, of course, benefits from that. Some Arab countries benefit from that. Israel benefits from that. The US benefits from that. I don't think it will last more than 2 to 3 years at the most, because our area cannot bear the brunt of that for longer that period of time. The first thing we should ask is how can we restore and rejuvenate and re-educate the Arab masses so that they become proactive again, to become again an actor locally and regionally. Secondly, how can we I think there should be serious reviews of the ideas and the objectives of the political Islamists, mainly the Muslim Brotherhood, unless they revisit their aims and objectives. I think the moderate Islamist movements are a national asset for Arab countries. I think we should force them to redevelop themselves and redevelop their discourse in a matter which is compatible to producing a real moderate political discourse. I think some of their ideas, or a lot of their ideas, has elements of extremism that should be dealt for. Also, we don't have a national project as Arabs, an identity for us. Who are we? I made a study in Egypt. I sent them to many university professors. I didn't even find the agreement and opinion between the people in the same country. Finally, this is a central question, I think. It's obvious that the problem with the Arab revolution, Arab Spring, that the immaturity of people and also the elites imposed on the reality and the arena in the Arab world by despotic regimes, and they acted immediately against this phenomena, and we must try again to allow the space for these people, these elites, to lead the revolutionary youth, because I place all my bets on them, on the revolutionary youth. I think they can lead us on a journey to make it home and dry. Most of the analysis focused on the rise of ISIL since they managed to gain control in Mosul. I think the rise of ISIL is linked to the events in Syria. I think the first city ISIL got was Al-Raqqa. It was one of the quietest places in Syria, so much so that Bashar al-Assad offered Eid or religious festival prayers in a mosque there to prove that it was peaceful. And also the phenomenon of the fighters returning from Iraq and the Iraqi authorities encouraged them, like Mahmoud Qawqasi and others. First, they were arrested, put in prison, then they released and allowed to go to Syria. Also, we must study why ISIL decided to control Raqqa first, then Mosul, then Kobani, when everybody was thinking they will go in the direction of Aleppo. They went in the direction of Kobani, and this requires an understanding. And also, we must study ISIL from the inside. We have another point. Also, the question is the ISIL threat close to the GCC? Some say yes, some say no. I don't think so. I think the threat is there and it exists and it's strong. For example, the Saudi members of ISIL, the number of Jordanians, Palestinians, Kuwaitis in the Al-Nusra front, we must study this and how will ISIL and Nusra sort out their agreements and disagreements after the air campaign has started?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since yesterday and today, we've been talking about the problem of ISIL, the rise of ISIL, and the expansion of ISIL, and reasons leading to the birth of ISIL. We have been diagnosing ISIL, but we didn't tackle the real issues that led to the birth of ISIL and its rise. Now we have heard some words about causes, roots, but we didn't focus or highlight these roots, whether we're talking about the political systems, for example, research centers such as the Arab Center. And the second point is the militants join ISIL from Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, or any other countries. These militants, why are they joining ISIL? They have unemployment, for example, and there's army of ISIL outside Syria, Lebanon, Jordan. Is it real unemployment, or is it foreign or external pressure that was exerted upon them? The last point is the mosques. Yesterday and today we have been talking about mosques leading to the birth and rise of ISIL, similar to what was said in the days of Al Qaeda and the Houthis tomorrow, and the this focus should be on the mosques. One, we should focus on the real causes. Second, we should focus on the real catalysts or real reasons for the people to join ISIL. I know for the third point is that mosques are instructed not to talk about stuff that really better religiously far from. They are not to talk or to instigate and to talk about jihad. They can talk about life and generic issues like that. Dr. Murtada, I think that in my opinion we didn't cover one aspect, which is the intellectual aspect. ISIL has this side to it geographically. The conflict zone is the Islamic region from Afghanistan to the Levant to Somalia to North Africa. Therefore, there is a major problem, which is the religious reform. I think we are not highlighting this issue enough. This is the root. It's intellectual, political issues do not play a major role in transitional periods. After religious reforms, maybe political aspects have become more important. Political aspects and security solutions are secondary. Any solution that does not take into consideration the main issue, which is the religious reform, will fall short, so will not be a long-term solution. And I think that after the colonial age in the Arab Levant, I think the elite people, the number of elite decreased or marginalized. The elite had left the religious aspect to religious men. We considered that religion is something that's history. We believed that religion will die with time. I think this is a Western idea. This is a living proof, this region is a living proof that religion will be alive. Any democratic election is leading to the election of Islamist parties. People are attached to Islam, but the reform hasn't been there yet. So the youth is attracted to such extremist movements. So so religious reform is the main issue. It has not been dealt with. There's a gap, and the elite is separated from the mass. The elite has a mindset, and the mass has a different mindset. The elite should go back to the issue of religious reform, and the reform is from within, not from outside. We should take into consideration our culture, our tradition, and it goes along with the concepts of modernity. Regarding some topics that have been tackled, or the idea that our colleague mentioned, it's more sophisticated, it's more complex. It's an ideological, intellectual regarding the main nucleus of ISIL. As to other points, they might be reactions at the socio-political level. ISIL, for example, can be a reaction to the Iranian influence in the region. It's got nothing to do with religion or ideology, or, for example, colonialism or despotism, oppressive regimes from inside. So I tend to consider this point more. Thank you. أحسن صحفي الجزيرة region, الجزيرة channel. I think we should talk about benefiting from opportunities or gifts that are being given. I think that ISIL has led the Americans or the US to bomb this organization in order to reinforce the internal structure of Daesh and to prohibit any reform attempts. We have witnessed the attempt to make this organization rise in 2007 in Iraq. It was an attempt to jump a leap forward, and different factions were born. So it was an attempt to stop a reform within Al Qaeda. There was an internal problem because of several issues. Now we have the same problem in 2013 when this disparity between Ibrahim al-Badri and his disciples and Muhammad al-Jawal, and there was this competition. It reached Khorasan in Afghanistan. Ayman al-Zawahiri, the declaration of the state was in Iraq in order to put an end to al-Zawahiri's school. So it was a leap forward to avoid several problems, and I think benefiting from different opportunities. The ISIL benefited from the fact that the Syrian regime did not bomb it in Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor. Al-Maliki attacked the protesters, and the regime forces attacked the civilians and the Pacific peaceful protests, and the Americans are in conflict in the region. The Kurdish parties and the Peshmerga benefited from the control of certain regions and oil fields. The unification of the Shia parties with Maliki's oppression, who tried to get re-elected for the third time, and this alliance between the different Shia factions and the different Kurdish factors. Parties. There are several problems in Kurdistan and Iraq and Syria that has reached a certain level. These issues should be taken into consideration when it comes to benefiting, so the parties in conflict benefiting from the situation. In the morning, we talked about an issue. Some people say that ISIL does not represent the Sunni because it is an extremist party. I think this is an extremist idea. The Sunni nation has led to social movements in the 60s, the national movements later on, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and Jordan, Salafis. That is different than the Salafi movement in the Levant and Iraq. So we should talk about this issue as well. ISIL has Sunni members in Iraq and Syria, and other militants who came from the West as well. Four main countries: Libya, Morocco, Tunisia, Saudi Arabia, in addition to, of course, Iraq and Syria. So these are the issues that should be taken into consideration. The rise of ISIL is definitely reaction to what happened in 2006. Before February 2006, before the bombing of Samarra, there was this idea was not born that all Shia should be killed, and in addition to the issue of the Syrian regime troops in 2011 and 2012 that were killing civilians. So 2006, 2007, and 2011-12, it was a reaction to the crimes that were committed in these years. The bombing is a tactical move. The US bombing is a tactical move. It is an attempt by the US to reshape the role that should be played in order to put an end to ISIL. But I doubt that that the US wants to get rid of ISIL. I think that ISIL has paved the way for the US to come back to this region in a different way. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Omar Al-Hajri. Thank you for this opportunity. I have a remark that would like to put forward regarding the discussions of yesterday and today. Very deep, excellent discussions, fruitful discussions. However, we have been talking about the landscape in a partial way, and the different perspective should be taken into consideration. The same scene can have different perspectives. The perspective that I would like to shed light upon is that some people have mentioned some point that were missing. ISIL is absent in this discussion. The discussion shed light on the rise of ISIL because of the fall of Mosul and the reshaping the borders of different countries. Was it a reaction to the international interference or regional interference? The US that is facing several problems. This is why it's shedding light on the issue of ISIS or ISIL. How should we perceive ISIL? Is it a terrorist organization? Of course, not all people are convinced that it is a terrorist organization. Is it a terrorist organization in a criminal law? According to the criminal law, of course, the legal experts can explain this point more. Or is it an ideological organization that's got a certain philosophy and it wants to put it forward? Or is it a military organization that recruits and mobilizes people similarly to the communist movement in different parts of the world in the previous century? How should we perceive ISIL? Should we consider ISIL a state that's got a vision that includes a part of the Ummah, of the nation? So my idea is that if we have another conference in the future, another meeting in the future, where the Arab Center within 3 years or maybe 30 years according to the Americans. So maybe not next week, Dr. Asmi. You have 1 year maybe to collect documented information from their own mouth. We are researchers, with all due respect to journalists. Of course, a journalist who is on air can talk and express his viewpoints, and he gives a general idea regarding what's happening. The writer has a similar perspective. However, when we have a researcher should give us some new information. We have Twitter, we have Facebook, we have the written media, the TV, the radio. So when we don't have any documentation, any documents, we cannot talk about this issue. We have questions, bold questions. How did ISIL expand? How are the US bombing ISIL? How do we consider them criminals while others can kill a child whose name is Omar and is offered to his parents? So there are criminals, there are killers, and there are others who are killing and who are criminals. So we should have more information about this topic, documented information. So a researcher, a political thinker should take these documented facts into consideration in order to present them to the elite of this region and to the mass of this region in order to put an end to this problem, this major problem that we are facing at all levels. Thank you for this valuable intervention.
لأنه فعلا أنت تدعو لأن لا نبقى نستطيع في
You don't want us to tackle the issue of ISIL in a superficial way. We should not only rely on the media, we should have a deep study of the situation. Dr. Azmi will be talking about this point at the end of this session. Thank you, Ahmad Abil Ala, researchers in the Arab Center for Research and Policy Study from Egypt. I have a question, clarification. In this region, are we creating a religious state to face the other religious state that is Israel? In this case, what is the future of this region? If such a state is allowed in this region, of course, the future will be reshaped in a completely different fashion. Of course, regarding the two comments that I have, first of all, the perspective or the way we perceive people, not all the people that were part of the Arab Spring are used to revolutions. Of course, we can take different people in different countries and we cannot compare what's happening in Libya with Tunisia and Egypt. This armed war, is it still considered a revolution? Burhan Ghaliuni yesterday said that the recommendation is to give arms to the opposition, weapons to the opposition. Is what's happening in Libya still a revolution with all the war that's happening? In this situation, I cannot assess these revolutions in the same manner and talk about similar causes. In Egypt, the second point is that Egypt was missing in this conference. Some people have talked and said that Egypt was the reason to the failure of the Arab Spring. How to deal with the Egyptian state, was it in a correct manner from inside and outside? Do we know who is providing the good atmosphere for these revolutions in different countries? We only have some facts regarding the revolutions. In Egypt, we do not know what are the secrets of July 52 revolution completely. So what about a revolution that was born 3 years ago? The youth were led to a conflict or a confrontation, and they couldn't provide any solution, any practical solutions. I cannot put forward a revolution without having a means and the tools to ensure the succeed of this revolution. Several people, several Egyptian people who went to the Tahrir Square have changed their mind in a while after seeing the results of the revolution. Of course, revolution is a very important act. However, if the result of this revolution were not as noble as the concept of revolution, I don't think that the revolution is a success. Some people are saying they're being marginalized and we don't want them to join ISIL, so we'll give them the floor.
Thank you. My name is Khalid Faris. I want to talk about the construction, the idea behind the construction and the structure of ISIL and what led to ISIL as an organization. I may start with some abstract. In my opinion, ISIL is basically a social movement established on the basis of there is no such thing as a social revolution. What do I mean by that? I mean, let's go back to how ISIL started, and the point I'm basing my analysis on is the Arab states which are in existence now currently in the Arab world, which are the result of a coalition of three forces of the Arab bourgeoisie, the rich people, who failed in building a state on the basis of development and growth. This is a fact that everybody knows. The second component is the religious authorities, the coalition or alliance of the ruling, political ruling elites and certain religious authorities which give it the legitimacy they need and require, who also failed in providing the kind of proper religious authority as such. All what they produce is a religion for the ruling authority to rule with. Also, thirdly, these states were not built on the idea of liberating Palestine and liberating the occupied Palestinian territories was not there. These three components, which were for a long time historically have been used and abused politically, economically, religiously, of course, will have some natural consequences. The first of which, the Arab National Liberation Movement, which started to liberate Palestine, failed and it was attacked and almost destroyed. Secondly, the social classes in the Arab countries, especially the poor ones, have been annihilated. Now you go everywhere in the world, you see, in the Arab country, the worst class structure in the world is in the Arab countries, because these poor classes have no idea how to liberate themselves from poverty. For us, it's the largest class, but it's the class which happens to have no idea whatsoever as to how they can liberate themselves. Thirdly, and the question of dealing with at this point you repeated 3 times already.
لا 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 ما بصير تفضل
Okay.
تفضل تفضل كمل عم مزح معك تفضل تفضل
نرجع لاسرائيل.
We go back to Israel.
فداعش ايش بتحكي اليوم؟ داعش
What is ISIL saying today? If you look at their political idea,
من اولويات داعش.
facing up to Israel is not a priority for ISIL.
تجميع لهذه الممارسة التي
So,
خلقتها هذه البنية.
so ISIL is an accumulation of all 3 points I talked about. They do not believe that the struggle is based on struggle against Israel to liberate Palestine. At least they don't believe in that. Secondly,
العلاقة بين داعش
the
والآخرين
relationship between ISIL and other Arab liberation struggles to form a national pan-Arabist front is not there. So therefore, ISIL is a reflection of these 3 elements. I hope that this was enough. Uthman Mukhtar. An American writer, David Hoffman, who talked about extremism in Syria, not Iraq, saying after the amount of barrel bombs thrown at Syria, if the Syrians did not turn into extremists, I will think they are dead, basically. So therefore, dealing with ISIL or any other terrorist group can only be dealt with as dealing with the cancer. Use chemotherapy to get rid of the root causes of it. Even if the American army and the Iraqi army in Basra, when there was resistance at the beginning of the American invasion, they used cluster bombs, and in Fallujah the Americans used white phosphorus, I guarantee you in years to come, we will have not only one ISIL but many ISILs popping up here and there, and we will require another 30 years if we forget the Palestinian question and the Israel conflict and focus on the fight against Iran and ISIL. I think the solution can be found in Baghdad in one day. I can place my last $50, which I have with me from my per diem on this. There are some Sunni demands. There are 14 demands. Now they become 15, in fact. All the Sunni tribes, all the main Sunni tribes like Shammar, Niza, Qedat, Jbur, Dlaim, all of them, these tribes are the core of Sunni society in Iraq. Now the leaders, the tribal leaders and the members of these tribes in all meetings with Iraqi government representatives, the Americans and any foreign dignitaries visiting Iraq, uh, we, 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 they all say that you have to kill the snake by chopping off its head. And the last scandal for Maliki in his last week in power, he distributed pieces of land to army officers, which turned out to be Sunni mosques. A mosque in Baghdad known as the Mechanics Mosque, it turned out to be the garden, and the surrounding area was distributed to Shiite army officers. How do you think the Sunnis are supposed to react on this? Al Jazeera and other channels show images of children being ripped to pieces by barrel bombs. You tell me you can convince them that in Doha I have a wonderful study center which deals with these questions in the most civilized way. He will say to you, rid me of this daily killing, and I don't need any of your conferences. I don't need ISIL. I don't need any extremism. And when the Mongolians occupied Baghdad and turned the river Tigris' color into the color red because of bloodshed, believe you me, there is worse incidents, and I'm speaking to you frankly. My cousin's name is Omar, was a well-known Sunni figure in history. He changed his name, and I assure you, the Shiite population of Iraq is losing as much as the Sunnis. Not as much as Sunnis, really, but they are being harmed because the Sunnis, they say they ruled Iraq for 80 years, so this is an act of revenge by Iran. In Al-Anbar province, which borders Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Syria, we have no Shiite religious shrines there to protect. Why should we have the so-called Asa'ib Ahl al-Haq, the bands of the righteous? They come and they say, we come to kill you. Wouldn't this drive the population into acts of revenge? Even the American ambassador in Baghdad was told by some Sunni personalities that if you put an end to this suffering, then this will rid the ISIL people from recruiting causes and being attractive. This is our Iraqi society. We are a tribal society. We are a simple society. We cannot really lie and say it's not easy for ISIL to recruit people because there are the fertile grounds for that. But if you put an end to these violations, then you will end their chances. But if you send your aircraft to bombard the so-called ISIL positions, you defeat ISIL, they disappear, then only to make room and for Shiite militias to come and kill the Sunni local inhabitants simply because Sunnis, you expect the Sunnis then to stand with you against ISIL? In the name of God, the most merciful, most compassionate, I will start my intervention by posing a question from Dr. Muhammad Al-Misfar, anybody who talks about ISIL and doesn't refer to the first Afghan war in the 80s will end up not understanding the full picture. I was a university professor at that time. It was an American intelligence operation aided by some GCC countries to use it against the Soviet Union at the time. The United States may have spent $20 billion. The GCC spent $80 billion. They used to say to people that the gates of heaven are the keys to the gates of heaven are in the hands of Sayyaf and Rabbani. They generated a gel of mad dogs which turned against their masters now. All these jihadi groups are infiltrated by intelligence agencies. How can the operation to liberate Kuwait cost $50 billion and the fight against ISIL should cost $500 billion? And I heard nothing about the Shiites, militias, or the Houthis in Yemen. Does ISIL have any good behind it? Yes, I say that. We cannot deny that. They stopped the establishment of a Kurdish state aided by Israel. 6,000 Egyptians were killed in one day, peacefully demonstrating. Nobody said anything. But when it comes to at most, ISIL is not more than 4, 5, 10,000. There is a revolution in Iraq, a revolution by the Sunnis against a sectarian regime. When they were not responded to, they turned into an armed struggle. When America says ISIL is ISIL, we will agree with it. We should stop being stooges of America. All the calamities we face are from America. We have to accept that. In my opinion, the historical development of the armed Islamist groups does not go back to Afghanistan. There were before that in Egypt with the free officers, and the armed struggle is a tactic, is not a strategy, and used by leftist groups, rightist group, nationalist groups, and others without necessarily belonging to one brand of ideology. Secondly, I am an Arab. I respect and love my country and my history, my language, and I really hope to see one day the Arab countries united in one country. Without a united state, there will be nothing as a pan-Arabist Arab nation, because only nations and states can embody such dreams. At the same time, I respect Turkey's right to do that, and the Kurds to have that, and the Iranians, Persians to have their right, and the right of each group to have its own country. Unfortunately, to talk about the Kurdish state being a second Israel is not allowed, or shouldn't be academically or humanly. Thank you. Thank you. I don't want to say any more than what Dr. Falah said to describe Kurdistan as a second Israel. I thank Dr. Falah for this position. I disagree with my brother Uthman in one thing. We cannot figure ISIL as a result of the Shiites annihilating the Sunnis. Let's say that the Shiite extremism was a result of the Sunni extremism and what Zarqawi called for the annihilation of Shiites. They started the sectarian struggle, and this ISIL, which is a development and the consequence of the Tawheed and Jihad movement by Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi, was a reason why the sectarian civil war started in Iraq in 2006-2007. Extremism can only produce extremism. Even the Shiite militias was a reason for the daily explosions and daily killings in these areas, in Baghdad and Shiite areas. Until now, many cars are being exploded in Shiite areas. How can we explain that? So this is mutual violence. This is one thing. Second thing, at the beginning of the Iranian revolution, the Iranian left used to say that the Imam will execute the revolution and go back to his shrine. They did not know that this is a complete project to start a state. Unfortunately, the resistant groups who ally themselves with ISIL now, they can apply pressure on the Iraqi government and they get the concessions, and then Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi will go back to his mosque and allow them to rule. This is a project which will engulf and swallow up all the Gulf region and all the Muslim countries. It's not the question of the grievance of one component in Syria and in Iraq, and so that give them back their rights. This is impossible. This is the project to start it, which should be confronted by all. ISIL is a terrorist organization par excellence, and we must not allow them. If there is a national struggle by the Sunnis, they must rely on the already existing that. But ISIL has turned against them similarly, like when it turned against the Syrian resistance too.
It is clear that the focus is on ISIL and terrorism. In my opinion, ISIL does not represent the crisis that we're living, the extent of this crisis. And as my colleague said, it is a form of violence, mutual violence. It is not only about ISIL. In my opinion, the crisis is way more serious. The end of the social pact between the people, the states, the governments, the regional relationships. It is not only because of the very small minor political mistakes or the several denominations or the vengeance, etc. In my opinion, it doesn't explain anything at all. What we are seeing today, maybe 30 years, I'm not sure that will be done by 30 years. If we carry on with the same way, the reasons, I should be talking about the reasons. The reasons are political decisions for 50 years at three levels. At the international level, we should know, for example, the Security Council has been blocked. The National Assembly of the UN isn't functioning well. And no decision was taken to intervene when it came to militias entering to Syria from Iraq, etc. There is paralysis at the international level. The international decision has been kidnapped by one state, and this one state should it not take a good decision. It means that we have no international decision, and main part of the Syrian crisis that revealed these issues is international. Two, not a single region in the world or the region is exempt from discussion, cooperation, or even agreements, legal agreements, such as the Levant. Nobody talks to each other, even in the Gulf. Neighboring countries between, for example, the Arab League. What's the Arab League? It's a cover up to the lack of agreements between Arab countries, mandatory agreements. There is no framework to cooperate between these countries. There is no legal framework. It is a major paralysis. Iran is sending militias, opening mosques for the Shias, distributing monies in Arab countries. Nobody's regularizing this. There are no laws. And this is very important. If we don't talk about this issue, we cannot put an end to it. At the international, at the government level, the relationship between the government and the people. What was the relationship between the regimes and the people? It was a total oppression, a total marginalization. It was new slavery. There is a lack of law. Instead of the rule of law, there's the rule of lack of law. So, ethnic segregation, cleansing, all sorts of oppression, despotism. We cannot understand what will come in the future if we don't analyze the past. This is why I'm saying we might go on for 30 years if we don't reconsider these political decisions that have been ruling the international system, the regional system, and the nature of the countries. We cannot do anything. What is ISIL? To conclude, what is ISIL? ISIL is a representation of the depression, of the frustration of several people in the Arab world. The Arabs are not part of modernity, civilization, democracy, etc. Instead of them putting forward their demands in terms of democracy, instead of moving forward, they are going backward. The Arab religious aspect, is way less developed than the 19th century. The confessional conflicts, the rights, lack of rights. At least in the 19th century, there was no border, and there were no intelligence services that are working to put the people in prisons. Today, people are frustrated, are deprived of any future, any hope, any coordination and cooperation. If there's an earthquake, people cannot stay together, hold on to each other. The intelligence services separates between people. Our societies have been destroyed by these policies, destroying the trust between people, destroying the capacity of the society to build a structure to fight the oppressive regimes. The Arab revolutions had a main objective to let the people decide. It was against the regimes, it was against the regional system. Maybe if Syria becomes democratic, Iran would lose its project of controlling the Gulf and having a better negotiation position with the West. So there is no legal framework. And as I said, the international system is not working. For 4 years, we have been bombarded in different areas of Syria on a daily basis. Aleppo, Damascus, different cities. Tens of barrels are been dropped on the children, and for 3 and 4 years, people have lost their homes. 10 millions, 12 millions, and they are being stricken on a daily basis. And not a single country at the international level was capable of taking serious measures. How did it happen? How can I shed light on Daesh, on ISIL? ISIL that is doing the same, of course. But what about the reasons? These regimes. Why should the people and the civilians be bombarded? Because Russia does not accept to deal with the international community, because Russia has problems with the Americans. If we don't criticize the main reason of the conflict, we cannot find a solution. There's a total paralysis of the international system. If we do not establish a change at all levels, the Middle East is actually this bridge that brings all these problems together. So if we don't deploy all efforts, I think all Arab people will become members of ISIL, not only Sunnis but also Shias, their own way, of course. It's not only about Sunnis, it's about brutality, it's about cruelty. So uh, this will be the basis of relationship between people, individuals, societies, and countries. This is actually what's happening today in the Levant area. The lack of law. Thank you, Dr. Burhan. I would like to give the floor to Dr. Azim Bshara. I would like, in the name of the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies, to thank everybody for their contributions. Of course, on a very short notice, it was a fruitful workshop, hopefully, and we thought, just like our dear colleagues said, in light of the news that we are seeing regarding different issues, the US intervention, the ISIL issue, we thought that this workshop is a good space to discuss some ideas. Of course, it's not scientific yet because there are no papers presented. However, I think that it is a very fruitful discussion. I would like to thank you all for these contributions. Of course, we'll not wait for 30 years to do another workshop or a conference. Regarding some ideas that were discussed, the importance of studying the ISIL, the geostrategic situation, or what is important in this region. It is not about priorities. For example, it's about fields of specialty. If a person is specialized in political anthropology and sociology. This person would like to study these aspects. This is why we have different experts from different fields. Bashar al-Assad negotiated with Dar'a people, the people of Dar'a, until 2012. He had an opportunity to do reforms. The Syrian people didn't want a revolution. The Syrian people saw Lebanon, saw Iraq. It would have been different had Maliki not attacked Al-Anbar, but negotiated with the protests. We wouldn't have heard maybe about ISIL. So ISIL has become the result of the lack of action. We cannot now close our eyes, and of course, we cannot disregard their ideas now, ISIL's ideas. Maybe the journalists, for example, sometimes the foreign journalists come to our countries, meet people, take down notes, and write books about ISIL sometimes. This is not that simple. We have a lack of information. The puzzle is not clear yet. There are gaps that we don't know how to fill. Maybe lots of people are suspicious regarding these gaps, the role of ISIL. And the imagination is very wide when it comes to ISIL and who's standing behind ISIL, etc. Mainly, I think it is not the Salafi jihadists are not new. Al Qaeda, Nawahri, etc. are not new. We know what Al Qaeda is actually, it's not new. The immigration of the youth is not new, whether on boats to South Europe or the Sahara. People or the youth that is frustrated, no horizon, no hope for a better future. This is not new. We should tackle what's new. What's the differentia specifica in Latin? What is different about this ISIL issue? I have tried to put forward my ideas. The US attempt in Afghanistan has led to the exportation of a combination of Taliban and Al Qaeda to different countries. Is it a confessional or a confessional phenomenon? I think it's a very simplistic way to look at things. It has benefited from the definitions. For example, if we're talking about Shias and Sunnis, what did the Christians of Mosul have to do with it? So the people who talk about confessionals, for example, in Lebanon, you have people wearing suits and they don't talk about it. However, they care about their denominations. So the problem is people who do not accept others. If you have different people or people who are different than you and you don't accept them, this is the problem. The If you say that ISIL has been supported by some societies because of confessional reasons, I agree. The Sunnis, of course, should be given their rights in order for the Sunni population not to join ISIL. ISIL does not represent the Sunni denomination. However, the Sunnis should be cared for and should be given their rights. So the main war was against the rebels. Marwan, we have prepared statistics. Several of the suicide bombings, 90% were against the other rebels, Ahrar al-Sham, Tawhid Jihad, etc. So most of the suicide bombings were carried out against other Islamic movements in Syria. Of course, they are Sunnis. So, talking about ISIL representing the Sunnis is not accurate because there is a different aspect. We're not talking about denomination, we're talking about takfiri, or the fact of refusing the other. So, of course, we need to have further documentation and further discussions regarding this point. The military withdrawal is not important. The role of the state is important. When the state becomes a state of vengeance against other denominations, it is not. It is no longer a state. It is no longer a government. Similar to what happened in Syria and Iraq. In Syria, we talk about a regime, but is it a regime really? It is a group of militias and gangs. I think that the state, the government in Syria, gave up on what the state is. The state, the country, or the government of a country should represent the all the population, and this is not the case. I think in Iraq it's the same. Al-Maliki transformed the government into a group of militias, and vengeance was the theme. ISIL is not actually a state, but it is an organization that calls itself state, and it is against the national state. It is against the national sovereignty of a state and the regional alliance between different countries. We are academics. We try to be as objective as possible. We are living in a transitional period. We have become the elite, and we have a role, a political role. We're no longer professionals in specific fields. Part of us have been possessed by the idea of ISIL, or obsessed with the idea of ISIL and what's different. And some people are having nightmares. Would ISIL arrive to this country or not? And of course, the families of these people, they're having nightmares about ISIL. But the very same people were disregarding for example, the fact that militants affiliated with the regime that used knives. So the regime militants in Syria have used knives to kill children, and I haven't seen them reacting. I think there is a lack of morality when it comes to assessing the situation in the Arab world. Most of us people are not satisfied with what happened in Syria. Some people have disregarded the rights of the people that was bombarded and bombed by the regime, and now they are so surprised and they are appalled by what's happening. It is very strange, actually. I think that in order for us to be credible when we discuss with the West, when we want to try to convince the West, I think we as elite should reconsider our positions. I remember the period of Rabi'a Adawiya. Thousands of people were killed, and the elite, the Arab elite, didn't take this into consideration or disregarded the importance of such an event. We are all appalled by the violence. I think that the violence in politics is not accepted, regardless of the party that uses this violence, not only ISIL. we have a situation in the region. We should take into consideration the view or the point of view of the people. Some people think that after the bombing of ISIL has become stronger. We should discuss this point. If your strategy is to put an end to ISIL by bombing or reduced its power by bombing and it has become stronger, we should take into consideration this perspective. We all know, some people have presented papers, Obama was obliged to intervene. The US intervened, obliged, because of the pressure, because of the videos posted online. Some people said, like our dear colleague, like Hussein, said that ISIL has invited the US to intervene when it comes to these videos that were posted online. Before these postings online, nobody was talking about Obama's intervention. Obama didn't care for, or didn't care about the Kurds, didn't care about the Arabs. So that was after these videos. So it's like a spectacle. It's like a tactic movement. It's not strategy. There's a crisis management that is needed. Uh, Obama actually, Mr. Obama is managing a crisis in the US, not here. Some Arab regimes always tend to let the US do the strategy part. We tell them now that the US does not have a strategy. You should develop a strategy. It is very clear that the US does not have a strategy. What will happen after bombing Syria or ISIL in Syria? What do you think? They have no answer. Abadi instead of Al Maliki, they try to have a better situation, but they don't have any answers. They are bombing, but they don't have a strategy. So the elite should decide. So we should think about these topics, and it is very important when it comes to discussion with Arab regimes. Some people ask about solutions. What are the solutions? Actually, I have solutions to subjects within the Arab Center. For example, I have a issue, I have a problem, how I troubleshoot it. But I can't say Turkey go and do this, Saudi Arabia go and do that. I cannot impose these solutions. The countries or the states uh, do not listen to individuals. The strategic situation in the region implies that it is necessary that Saudi Arabia and Turkey coordinate with each other. They cannot be against each other. We cannot understand that in light of the situation in Syria and Iraq. If you want to counterbalance the Iranian influence, you should agree with each other. As a intellectual individual, how can I contribute? This is my idea. Saudi Arabia and Turkey should be together. We have always been on the side of the people, revolutions. I cannot think and propose solutions for a geostrategic situation where the parties that are involved do not have suggestions. Maybe the only suggestion is to survive. So, for example, I talk with this regime, I talk with that country to survive with no strategy. You have a very complex situation in Iraq that needs a strategy. You have a very complex situation in Syria that needs a strategy. You should tell us after these bombings, what will happen? Do not wait from Arab people to, just because some people are bothered by what's happening with ISIL. I think 90% of the people are appalled by what's happening. Of course, nobody wants to live this way, but nobody is ready to fight ISIL for Assad or to fight ISIL for al-Maliki. He might fight ISIL for himself, for to defend himself. Someone needs to make him understand that this fight is to find a solution to the Syrian case, to the Syrian Iraq. Some people are telling them it's not on our agenda, it's not an item on our agenda. Will it be tomorrow on your agenda or the day after tomorrow? What can I do if it's not on your agenda today? This is the situation that we are facing. People are watching TV. Of course, people watch TV, they do not participate or take part in such a conference. They see part of Syria being bombarded by the regime, another part being bombarded by the US and the allies. Similarly, in Iraq. And people cannot do anything about both countries. They want to fit in the strategy. I have an interest, for example, fighting ISIL would lead to a just regime in the future in Iraq, and of course, people would fight, but we're not talking about promises. There should be facts. As academics, we continue, we carry on, we study ISIL, we will continue. Some colleagues talked about the Western think tanks. We are ready to deal with Western organizations, even partnering and organizing workshops. We, the Arab Center, we have a role, and if you think that cooperation with us is valuable, we are more than ready to cooperate with local or Western organizations and institutions. There will be, God willing, a special session for Iraq and then Syria in order to give more details. Thank you all for your participation. Thank you, Dr. Azmi Bishara, for your intervention, and we hereby conclude this session and this conference. Once again, I would like to thank everybody for their participation, and a report will be published about the most important points that we tackled, the papers, the ideas that were mentioned. Of course, maybe some people are pessimistic about the region. However, maybe there is some hope. We are waiting the Tunisian elections. Thank you all for being here with us.